From an apology for profanity to the growing fight over progressive conservative branding and the Carney government surviving a key confidence vote. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, Jim Groom, a political scientist, recently retired from Medicine Hat College, and Rob Breakenridge is a broadcaster, columnist, and host of the Line Alberta podcast. Good evening to you both. And let's begin with a Calgary MLA apologizing to a constituent after a voicemail captured her using profanity.
All right, go to this next one.
It was inappropriate. It was a flippant comment, and I'm grateful for the conversation that he had with me and that he accepted my apology. I really appreciate that.
The voicemail was left by UCP MLA Tanya Fir while returning calls from constituents upset over the government's use of the notwithstanding clause in ending the strike by Alberta teachers. Fir didn't realize the line was still open when she used the profanity to describe the next caller. That caller, Calgary writer Doug Furby, was sent a copy of the recording and then contacted Fir for an explanation. Jim, is this as simple as a moment of poor judgment, as the Minister of Arts, Culture and Status of Women has described her situation? What do you make of the scenario playing out here?
I do think it goes deeper than that. As we know, Furby has mentioned that he felt sort of insulted by her comments. And additionally, when he first approached her about what happened, she denied it and said, "Nothing to see here, let's move on." Well, of course, then he sent her the copy of the actual voicemail, and all of a sudden she's quite contrite and taking it rather seriously. I think if she'd been right up front and apologized right off the bat, it would have gone a long way to help her situation out.
Rob, to what degree do the dynamics here reflect the divisive nature of politics in our province right now? Or is this a one-off that warranted an apology because it ended up in the public eye?
Well, yeah, I think it does sort of speak to the amount of tension and just the volatility, the emotion in Alberta politics these days. And clearly the government's feeling the heat. I think this sort of illustrates that, the pressure they're under, the way they're reacting to all of this criticism that they're facing these days, right? Remember, this is Tanya Fir returning these messages, which are clearly not complimentary messages. These are messages she's receiving from constituents who are not happy about things. And so she's feeling that pressure. But I think the problem of this, the optics of this, it's like that peek behind the curtain, right? I mean, the idea that this is what they say about you when you're not looking, when they think that you can't see and hear what's going on. This is the kind of language they speak. Now, this may be totally out of keeping for Tanya Fir, and maybe it is an exception, but it just conveys that perception of a government that's really disdainful of those that aren't on board with their agenda. And so I think it plays into everything else that's going on right now. The growing perception that this is a government that's out of touch, and we're seeing that manifested, and we're seeing in some poll numbers, these recall campaigns. I think it is kind of emblematic of the mood and the atmosphere in Alberta right now.
Jim, does this, in this particular instance, does it have lasting impact or does it fall off the radar?
No, I think it'll be a 24-hour news coverage aspect to it. Unless you could show a track record that this is a common approach, or we see it more often. I think Rob's right. It does speak to the fact that there's a level of contempt for the electorate, and the UCP government has sort of demonstrated that along the way. And I think if that becomes a consistent problem, then it will maintain to have legs.
All right. Next up, the United Conservative Party is suing a pair of former caucus members. The UCP accuses Peter Guthrie and Scott Sinclair of conspiring to damage the party's image and mislead the public. The now independent MLAs are attempting to revive the progressive conservative brand by joining forces with the Alberta Party and have applied to Elections Alberta for the name change. Rob, in launching a lawsuit, what's to be made of the degree to which the United Conservative Party is prepared to fight this? What message is the UCP sending?
Well, and this was something Peter Guthrie pointed out in his response, that there have long been parties in Alberta since the merger that have used the name Wildrose, and the UCP has really ignored that. So it's a little bit selective in their response, or selective in their outrage, which I think does betray some concern, even arguably some panic about the possibility of having the progressive conservative brand back on the political scene and the threat that could pose to the UCP. Now, obviously, there are legal arguments being made here, and we can't really prejudge what a judge is going to say about all of this. But I do think it's interesting that, they've sort of ignored the use of the Wild Rose name, but they're really mobilizing to ensure that nobody uses the Progressive Conservative brand. Now, they're also trying to prevent Elections Alberta from making a decision here, which ultimately really is where the focus should be. I mean, it's essentially the Alberta Party asking Elections Alberta if it's okay to use that name, and it was Elections Alberta that said it was available in the first place. So, the UCP hasn't really gone as hard after Elections Alberta, but they're kind of the arbiters here, and it's important to keep that in mind.
Jim, surprised the UCP would continue to fight Guthrie, Sinclair, and the Alberta Party in their efforts to rebrand as the PCs. And where do you see this one landing with Albertans?
It's particularly ironic because a few weeks ago, the Premier was quoted as saying, democracy is in the legislature. It's not determined by courts. And yet here we have the party suing a group of people. These sort of decisions should be made at the polling stations where people decide if they're okay with changes and such. Because it's reminiscent of some of the activities that go on in the States where when in doubt, sue the person and sue the group, and to the point where they really don't have the wherewithal to defend themselves. And so you turn out victorious simply because you outlast their financial wherewithal.
Rob, to come back to your point, what kind of pressure do you see this now putting on Elections Alberta as it deals with the application to rebrand the Alberta Party? Is there added pressure there?
Well, perhaps. I think it's, there's a lot that Elections Alberta is having to deal with right now. And it's interesting how this overlaps with some other issues. Remember, Elections Alberta asked for some additional resources to try to manage all of these recall petitions and citizen initiative referendum petitions. And they ended up getting barely a tenth of what they were asking for. So this is something else that Elections Alberta has to deal with. I mean, there is a process to be followed. If you want to start a new party, register a party name. Elections Alberta is going to take a close look at that. What are you calling yourself? Is there potential infringement or overlap with existing parties? Now, the word conservative, I remember Danielle Smith a while ago suggesting that it's almost like the word itself can't be used by another party, that there can only somehow be one conservative party, which is silly because not too long ago there was something called the Freedom Conservative Party that existed. And then again, the UCP didn't really fight that or challenge that in court. So I think Elections Alberta has its process, and there's nothing to suggest that they've strayed from that process or that mandate. But again, I mean, if you've got the courts involved and they say to Elections Alberta, you have to stop here, you can't do that, Elections Alberta would be bound by that. So, the stakes are high in the legal form here.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Okay, time for us to take a bit of a break. But when we come back, the Carney government's survival of a key confidence vote and what it says about the road forward. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. As we heard off the top tonight, the Carney government narrowly survived Monday's confidence vote on approval of its first federal budget, and it came thanks to a last-minute pledge of support from Elizabeth May of the Greens, as well as a handful of abstentions. Now, Jim, to what degree was the outcome of this vote manufactured, for lack of a better description, or was it truly one of those let the chips fall where they may?
Well, I think it was clearly stage managed. No one wants an election right now. And if you force an election, as a Conservative Party, as an example, you would have to wear that for the next while, right? Voter fatigue it would kick in. People would start to realize the expense, and they've heard enough of the rhetoric from politicians. So it's definitely something that they had to stage manage, and it made it look close, of course, because they have to respect the opposition. They have to at least hold out a bit of a hope for the opposition. But I think it was definitely stage managed.
Rob, is there a message to Canadians in how Monday's vote played out? Or is it as simple as no one, parties included, wants another federal election at this time?
Yeah, it was almost like the other way around, right? A message from Canadians to our elected officials that don't screw this up. We don't really want an election right now, and it is so risky. And I think maybe the parties are sort of approaching it. Well, is it possible that we can direct that anger at our opponents? Who's going to be held responsible if there is an election? Is it the opposition for voting against it? Is it the government for not compromising and trying to ram through this budget? So it is so volatile. I think at the end, everybody realized that this would be crazy for us to pull the pin on this parliament and go back to Canadians, a really volatile electorate, I think, under the circumstances. So that's what ended up prevailing in the end here. It is an interesting dynamic, though, with the Liberals. Recently, we talked about the floor crossing or the curious case of one MP who's leaving politics. The Liberals are very close to a majority, and yeah, they survived this, but I think they realize the importance of getting to 172. So will we see any further outreach? Are there any more floor crossings in the future, not even necessarily from the Conservatives? The Liberals really wanting to solidify that majority and try to take some of the drama out of any future confidence votes.
Jim, on that point of drama, do the Liberals come off here with an actual win?
Yes, definitely was a win for the Liberals. It was clearly a victory for them, and they understood it was a victory, even though the other parties sort of capitulated. But the other parties also recognize that in a minority government, they have more power than in a majority government. And the last thing they want is to have an election where people, as Rob says, blame them for having the second election and have a majority Liberal government set in for 4 years, because that doesn't allow them to have any influence whatsoever against the governing party.
Rob, Alberta MP Matt Genereux playing a role here last evening, abstaining from another vote. Where do you think that leaves dynamics within the Conservative Party?
Yeah, he's like an MP who's there but not there. And, I know you touched on this earlier, but it's really bizarre, the whole set of circumstances where he's leaving politics, but he's not leaving politics till spring. So, I mean, he just ran again and he's prepared to wait. So it's a really odd sort of situation he's in where he wants to get out of politics, but the time to do it wasn't a few months ago. The time to do it's not now. And yet he abstains on this vote. So I think, folks in his riding would be fair to wonder, like, what is going on? Are we getting representation? Why did we send this guy back to Parliament? If he's not going to do his job, then maybe, we should get a by-election sooner rather than later. So I think that's a tough spot for him. And, this is a toss-up riding too. I don't know that this is a slam dunk for the Conservatives. So that's the other risk here is, they held on to this riding, but in the midst of all of this and all of this drama, is it possible that in a by-election they might not be able to hang on to it? And could that compound some of the problems that the Conservatives are dealing with right now?
Jim, in terms of being in a tough spot, how long do you see Matt Genereux remaining in the Conservative caucus before actually acting on his intention to resign?
See that as a bit of a contradiction, because when you're in caucus, there are loyalties and there is confidential discussions that go on. And if you're already announced that you're going to resign in the spring, it makes it difficult for people to have a level of faith and trust with you. So, of course, Poilievre has to win the leadership election in January 1st. And then I would say he was going to take action by asking certain people to leave the party.
All right. Rob, smooth sailing now for the Carney Liberals, or is this a minority government that is destined to fall as time goes on? The opposition parties eventually will align on taking it down.
I don't think that's in the cards anytime soon. And like I said a moment ago, I think the Carney Liberals are still probably interested in a path or a scenario that can get them to 172 seats, to a majority in Parliament, if there's any other potential floor crossers out there. It will be interesting to see. For example, Elizabeth May supported the budget and says even though she hasn't really trusted Carney in the past, she still trusts him to take climate issues seriously. But again, as we've been hearing, the Prime Minister could be on the verge of a memorandum of understanding with Alberta's Premier on building a new pipeline. And so how's that going to go over with Elizabeth May? Or how's that going to go over with other elements within the Liberal Party too? So there's some of those potential big challenges out there for Mark Carney in addition to what he's facing from the opposition parties. So, yeah, if they can't get to a majority in the House of Commons, they could face some bumps in the road for sure in the coming weeks and months.
Jim, are we all done with MPs crossing the floor, or could more of that still happen?
I think there's more coming because there is a disconnect between Poilievre and his leadership team that was exemplified during the election, where there was some real dissatisfaction with how he was approaching things. And his failure to adapt seemed to be a big one, especially during the election. He seems to have said, I'm going to adapt now. But even when you see different interviews of him, he still seems to have that cutting edge, and that's who he is. And I'm not sure that's what everybody in the party wants.
Yeah, and there will still be a lot of focus on what comes up with the leadership review in Calgary in January. All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it there for time. Great to see you both. Thank you kindly.
Thank you.